I was actually kind of excited when I first saw the new Pricia ruler in Return of the Dragon Emperor. For most of Grimm and early Alice Cluster, Fire had solidified itself as a color that likes to go for super early aggression and close games out in the first few turns, or go bust while doing so. Once Lapis Cluster started, Fire had shifted more into burn than aggro, and that proved to be a weak strategy when control decks were getting stronger and stronger. And then she appeared, separating the clouds of darkness with her, butt wings? My point is that Pricia brought heavy aggression back into Force of Will, mostly thanks to her ability that can grant swiftness to any resonator on her side of the field. There's a good 3 or 4 different variations of Pricia out there now, but my favorite is Myths, which is an archetype made up mostly of boss monsters that happen to have zero synergy between themselves. While I know the Izanagi build tends to be the preferred competitive one, I rather enjoy the consistency that comes from focusing on fire-specific myths, since they happen to have a card that can search them all. I've included the deck list here and in the description below. And with that said, let's get into it. The 1-drops in this build feel pretty self-explanatory. They're going to be staples in just about any fire or wind deck, be it Pricia or not. Guinevere lets you quickly draw to combo pieces, Sacred Elf enables plays to go off earlier, and Ruckegg is an amazing searcher when it can grab 16 of your deck's 22 resonators. Some Pricia variants run Tama over Egg, but myth builds need to consistently get to all the cards they need in hand as fast as possible. Searching will always be faster than banking on a draw. The only time I choose Tama over Ruckegg in a myth build would be in something that focus on using Izanagi or Odin as a boss monster over Red Boy, but we'll get into that a little bit later. The rest of the non-myth resonators are there for utility purposes. You can run them at lower numbers thanks to Ruckegg. The first and cheapest utility resonator is Fiery Fox of Reincarnation. Fox lets you send 1 magic stone to the graveyard in order to call another from the top of your stone deck. This can come in clutch with Pricia since she gives flying to a resonator every time you call in a windstone, and can make Ruckegg a good blocker for flying threats like Gwyber, Chimeras, or a Pricia Jack in the Beanstalk deck. Our next utility card is Ywain, Knight of Lions. He's a 6/6 3-drop, but gains swiftness and first strike when you control a beast, and then gains 200/200 for each beast you control. He also does 200 damage to every other resonator on the field whenever you declare an attack with him. His beast-related effect doesn't state it has to be a resonator, so he naturally comes in as an 8/8 swiftness first strike thanks to Pricia's typing. Ywain can also become a good Gwyber or Griffin killer if you have a Fox out as well, since he can do the 200 to them and then finish him off with his attack while staying safe thanks to first strike. Earther feels pretty self-explanatory, as she's shown up in plenty of decks before. She's there to deal with large single targets such as Gwyber, her Skyscraper Giant, but she's also effective at killing J-rulers like Zero, Master of the Magic Saber, and other Pricias. I don't really have much else to say about her, so let's just move on to the next card. Maria Bella the Machine-Hearted is the last non-myth heavy hitter, and she exceeds in so many different areas that it would be silly not to run her. She gives resource advantage by calling a stone when she enters play, offers non-battle removal through damage, provides spell cancellation, and has a decent 1k body that is guaranteed to come in with swiftness in a Pricia-focused deck. Now that we've gotten everything else out of the way, let's talk about the deck's main playmakers, myths. The myth toolbox is actually pretty huge and goes all the way back to the now rotated out Grimm cluster, but we're only focusing on a few of them, as most variants of the deck try to do. Our main boss monster is Fiery Chariot Red Boy. He's a 6-drop Fire Myth resonator that does 500 damage to our opponent's board, and does an additional 100 damage for each unique will paid for him. If you really want to hardcast this guy from your hand, you can, but the main way to lay him down is with Spinning Myths, a 3-drop chant that lets you play 1 myth from your hand for free, and if it's the second card or higher that you've played that turn, you get to call a stone as well. It's a great play with Pricia since whatever myth you throw in is guaranteed to gain swiftness if you get the secondary effect off of Spinning Myths. The deck runs Rewriting Laws and at least 8 0-drop Regalia as reliable ways to guarantee you get the torrent effect off. The last card in the main deck that I want to talk about is Frigg, Goddess of Abundant Harvests. She's a 5-drop Wind Myth resonator that acts as a recovery option since she can fetch a resonator, chant, and addition from the graveyard when she enters the field. She's a great way to recur resonators like Red Boy and Earther, and she can pull back Spinning Myths, even if it was used to play her that turn. She's not really a boss monster, but she is a nice recovery tool when you find yourself against control-heavy decks. But what about the other myths? Well, most of them really aren't worth running because they're limited by the colors of the deck, or their abilities just don't synergize with a heavy aggro deck. There are a few worth mentioning though, so here they are. Izanagi has shown up in a lot of top lists since he can remove OTK hindering cards like Death Scythe, but being a light resonator makes him unsearchable by Ruckegg, so you have to rely on either a heavy draw engine or Hydromonica to grab him reliably. You can try to find a balance between Izanagi and Red Boy, but I'd rather just main Red Boy and side in Izanagi when faced with decks that put down a lot of Regalia or Resonators that Red Boy would have problems with. Odin has his own build that's very different from the typical Pricia aggro strategy that makes use of Pricia's Leap to let him attack 4 times per game with swiftness and flying. An Odin deck needs more control options since it goes off a little slower than Red Boy or Izanagi beatdown, but it gives you a very reliable way to end the game in one turn if done right. Ox King is an okay beater, and he can deal with problem resonators like Abdul or Tsukiyomi Noble, but he lacks protection in a metagame where Stall and Destruction have continued to become stronger. He's good against certain decks, but weak against most. He's worth mentioning if only because you can ram him into Charlotte and kill her even when she is at max power. And if you really want to try him, I guess you could drop Red Boy down from 3 to 2? There's really not much to the spell rundown here. Everything in the deck either serves to draw you cards to get you spinning myths faster, or is meant to act as some kind of protection against common counters. The Regalia layout is pretty standard as well. 4 Leavitine, 2 to 3 Death Scythe, and 1 or 2 Horn of Sacred Beast. Horn's pretty strong with Fiery Fox, since it can return the stones you sent to the graveyard back to your stone deck. You could also use Apollo to reuse Frigg if you wanted, but hopefully a match never comes down to needing that much recycling. Side deck construction is pretty straightforward, and is easily alterable depending on what you expect to face. Final Forfeit helps you get past Flip Zero's skill negation and opponent Pricia's from killing you. It prevents Jack from searching Giant, and stops cards like Abdul, Noble, or Arthur from controlling the field for a turn. Gale Force remove pesky flyers, which are pretty popular right now thanks to Gwyber and the Chimeras. Wing Trap is the opposite, and it works out pretty well since you can always make it a live card when you need it while Fiery Fox is on your field. Keen Sense stops strong spells and removal, and Burn to Cinders helps remove aforementioned threats like Zero, Abdul, or Noble. Overall, I really like Myth builds because of how versatile they are. A lot of how you build a Myth deck is based on what matchups you expect to see and what you want your win condition to be. The deck's biggest weakness is that it runs out of steam very quickly if you commit too early and lose your draw and damage sources to negation or removal. Myths are a strong build though, and probably will remain that way even after rotation gets a bit of their consistency.